The silence surrounding this story is almost deafening, and that in itself is revealing. A few years ago, anything Harry and Meghan did would have dominated global headlines. Every gesture, every speech, every trip was dissected endlessly. But now, their quiet withdrawal from the parents' network barely made a ripple. No front-page coverage, no think pieces, no major commentary. The world, it seems, has moved on. That absence of attention tells a story bigger than any press release could. Once the Sussexes were media magnets, polarizing, yes, but undeniably influential. Now, their announcements are met with indifference, and when their grand initiatives quietly collapse, few even notice. The shine has worn off, and beneath it, what remains is a pattern too familiar to ignore. Big promises, dramatic messaging, and then slow, silent retreat. The parents' big network was supposed to represent growth, proof that Harry and Meghan had evolved from victims of royal life into global changemakers. But as time passes, it's become clear that their ventures often share a fatal flaw. They're built around image, not infrastructure. Everything depends on optics, what looks meaningful, not what is. Even the language they use betrays that obsession with perception, combining efforts, maximizing impact, leveraging resources. Each phrase crafted to sound visionary, each one carefully designed to conceal the truth. Nothing substantial was achieved. It's corporate activism, stripped of substance. But while Archewell's projects stumble, organizations like Parents Together quietly continue the work, without fanfare, without celebrity sheen, without needing to turn grief or advocacy into spectacle. That's what makes this handover so ironic. Harry and Meghan could have used their influence to strengthen existing charities from the beginning. Instead, they built a redundant platform, spent over a year achieving nothing, and then handed it back to the very people who were already doing the job right. It's a cycle that extends far beyond this one case. Look at their broader portfolio: the Spotify deal that imploded, the Netflix projects that rarely trend, the Archewell Foundation, whose output remains vague and inconsistent. Each time, there's a grand debut followed by diminishing results. And each time, rather than accountability, we get spin. Even when Harry and Meghan do show up, at galas, award shows, mental health summits, the focus inevitably shifts back to them. The cause becomes a backdrop. The story becomes their redemption arc. That might have worked once when public curiosity was on their side. But now, after years of repetition, audiences see through it. And yet, there's a deeper tragedy beneath the criticism. The causes they choose, mental health, online safety, grief support, are profoundly important. These are spaces that need genuine advocacy and consistent leadership. But when those causes become vehicles for personal branding, their impact gets diluted. What could have been meaningful becomes performative. Take, for instance, Harry's speech at the gala where he mentioned the parents' network being absorbed. It was monotone, uninspired, a man going through the motions rather than leading with conviction. Meghan, meanwhile, has shifted her focus toward media projects and lifestyle branding, leaving the humanitarian side of Archewell increasingly hollow. Together, they look less like global advocates and more like public figures searching for relevance. The irony is painful. When they first left royal life, their message was about freedom, the chance to use their voices for good, on their own terms. But with each misstep, each quietly shelved initiative, that promise fades. Instead of freedom, they seem trapped in a loop, trying to prove their worth through grand gestures that never fully materialize. And now, even their critics have grown tired. The outrage has turned into apathy. When headlines about them surface, they're no longer about impact, they're about image. The very thing they once said they were running from has become the core of their brand. Still, there's a glimmer of possibility buried beneath all this noise. If Harry and Meghan can learn to let go of control, to support established organizations rather than trying to reinvent them, they might yet find redemption. Their visibility still holds power, if directed toward causes with real infrastructure and genuine expertise. The problem has never been their passion, it's been their execution. But that would require humility, the willingness to be part of something bigger without needing to own it. It would mean showing up quietly, without a camera crew, without polished statements or buzzwords, just showing up for the right reasons. Whether they're capable of that remains to be seen. For now, the silence around the Parents Network's quiet disappearance says everything. The world isn't angry. It isn't outraged. It's simply done watching. And maybe that's the most devastating outcome of all. Not scandal, not backlash, just indifference. Because once the applause fades and the spotlight dims, what's left isn't the image or the brand, it's the work. And without that, even the loudest voices eventually echo into nothing. The lack of coverage around their exit may be the most telling sign of all. When Harry and Meghan first left the royal family, every move sparked headlines. Now, their biggest retreat in years has come and gone with barely a whisper. The world's fascination has shifted, and what was once interpreted as bold independence is increasingly read as inconsistency. The Parents Network's quiet disappearance fits into a broader pattern that's hard to ignore. High-profile launches built on stirring language and strong imagery, followed by dwindling follow-through. Each initiative begins with lofty phrases: expanding impact, joining forces, accelerating advocacy. That sound like progress, but mask the reality that the work itself often stalls. What's left behind are good intentions and frustrated partners. Parents Together will likely carry the mission forward more effectively, providing structure and continuity for the families who were promised a community. For Harry and Meghan, the episode underscores a growing credibility problem. Causes built around optics instead of operations rarely last. If there's a path to recovery, it will require a shift from spectacle to substance. They still have reach, but to regain trust, they'll need to lend that reach to people who understand the slow, difficult side of advocacy and do it without making themselves the story. Until then, the silence surrounding their latest retreat may prove more damaging than any scandal. In public life, outrage fades. Indifference endures. The indifference is, in many ways, the final verdict. Once Harry and Meghan stood at the center of global curiosity, every gesture analyzed, every word dissected. Now the world barely glances when one of their key initiatives collapses. That shift isn't born from cruelty or fatigue. It's a natural response to repetition. People have simply seen this pattern before. It always begins the same way. A grand declaration, dressed in words like impact and change. Cameras flash, glossy photos circulate, and promises are made. But somewhere between the press release and the follow-through, the momentum fades. The mission, however noble at first, gets lost in the noise of brand management. What remains are fragments, websites that go quiet, projects that drift, and families left waiting for the help they were promised. For the Parents Network, that pattern hit especially hard. Its members weren't celebrity fans or casual supporters. They were grieving mothers and fathers hoping to turn tragedy into purpose. They believed in the vision because they had to. When you've suffered unimaginable loss, you cling to any chance that it might matter, that it might help someone else. But instead of the meaningful community they were told to expect, they were left with another closed chapter in the Sussex's long line of unfinished beginnings. And yet, this isn't just about one failed project. It's about what that failure represents. Archewell was built to be the embodiment of Harry and Meghan's new life, proof that they could lead with compassion outside the confines of royalty. But compassion requires consistency. It requires quiet, steady work long after the headlines fade. And that's where their public persona falters, in the quiet. Because when the cameras are gone, the spotlight dims, and the applause dies down, the real test begins. That's when credibility is earned. That's when causes live or die. Harry and Meghan's problem isn't that they lack passion. It's that they mistake passion for permanence. They believe that emotion, the tearful interviews, the heartfelt speeches, can substitute for the grind of actual advocacy. But emotion is fleeting. Real change demands endurance. Even the language they use reflects that confusion. When Harry spoke of leveraging partnerships and expanding the mission, it sounded visionary, until you realize those are the same words used to rebrand failure as progress. The Parents Network didn't expand, it ended. Its families weren't given more resources through collaboration. They were handed off to someone else who could do what Archewell couldn't. And that's why this moment matters. Because while the Sussexes' retreat might look small in the grand scope of their global persona, it points to something far deeper, a credibility gap between their image and their impact. In the royal world they left behind, image was everything. But in philanthropy, image without infrastructure means nothing. You can't charm your way through logistics, strategy, or accountability. You have to build, maintain, and follow through. If Harry and Meghan truly want to turn things around, they'll need to start by rethinking what leadership looks like. It's not about launching something new every year. It's about showing up for the same cause, over and over, long after the attention has faded. It's about letting experts lead, letting real stories take center stage, and understanding that their names are tools, not the purpose. Perhaps that's the most powerful shift they could make now, to stop trying to own the narrative, and instead lend their platform to people who already live it. Because at the heart of all this, behind the PR strategies, behind the controversies, are real people, real pain, and real needs. And those don't wait for the next rebrand or gala speech. In the end, history rarely remembers who made the loudest announcement. It remembers who kept showing up when nobody was watching. That's where the Sussex story stands now, at a crossroads between noise and meaning, between performance and purpose. And only time will tell if they finally choose the harder, quieter road that leads to something lasting. There's something haunting about how quiet this downfall has been. No outrage, no redemption arc, just silence. And in that silence, a truth begins to echo. Harry and Meghan's problem is no longer visibility, it's credibility. When they first left the royal family, their story carried weight, the promise of breaking free, redefining duty, and rewriting what modern philanthropy could look like. But the years since have shown that purpose, when built on publicity, cannot hold its own. The more they speak about change, the less they seem to achieve it. The more they chase control, the less control they appear to have. The Parents Network was supposed to be a fresh chapter, a symbol of their ability to build something genuine from scratch. But what began as a heartfelt mission has now ended as a quiet surrender, one that even their most loyal supporters find difficult to justify. It's not that people wanted them to fail, it's that people wanted them to mean something again. And that's the tragedy here. Because beneath all the brand polish, there's still a real story. Two people who wanted to make a difference, but lost sight of what difference actually looks like. Change doesn't come from speeches, it comes from consistency. It doesn't require being adored, it requires being dependable. And for all their influence, that's where Harry and Meghan have faltered most. Their post-royal identity has become a performance loop. Launch, promote, disappear. Each new project arrives with emotional monologues and sweeping claims, and then slowly dissolves once the novelty fades. Spotify, archetypes, the Invictus PR storms, now the Parents Network. Each time the same outcome, ambition without anchor. And yet, even as their credibility erodes, they keep trying to frame endings as evolution. Joining forces, expanding reach, collaborating for greater impact. The same words, recycled endlessly, crafted to sound like growth, but hiding the collapse beneath. In the world of real advocacy, where families mourn and policies change, that kind of language rings hollow. Meanwhile, the organizations that quietly absorb their failed ventures, like Parents Together, are left to do the hard, thankless work that never makes headlines. The irony? Those groups are everything Harry and Meghan claim to be. Focused, grounded, and genuinely impactful. But this story isn't just about two public figures struggling to sustain a brand. It's about what happens when image overtakes intention, when helping people becomes secondary to proving something, to the press, to the public, maybe even to themselves. And once that happens, sincerity becomes impossible to believe, no matter how eloquent the delivery. Still, it's not too late for them, not completely. Redemption doesn't come from another high-profile initiative. It comes from humility. It comes from knowing when to stop talking and start listening. If they could hand their spotlight to the people who actually do the work, the researchers, counselors, and advocates, and stay in the background long enough for something real to grow, they might rebuild what they've lost. Because influence doesn't mean leadership. It's only power when it's used quietly, consistently, and for someone other than yourself. For now, though, the Sussex's story feels suspended. Not in failure, but in fatigue. The public has stopped expecting breakthroughs, and the media has stopped pretending to care. That's what makes this the most telling moment yet. Their biggest challenge isn't the critics or the tabloids, it's irrelevance. And in the end, that's how legacies fade. Not through scandal, but through silence. Through the slow realization that the world kept moving, and the story you were trying to control no longer needs you to tell it. Because the truth doesn't always fall with noise. Sometimes it just disappears quietly, like the Parents Network, like so many other promises, quietly absorbed into something that finally works without them.